Imagine walking into a bar on what feels like just another ordinary night. The lights are dim, the floor sticky, the jukebox groaning in the corner. People laugh, glasses clink, and everything seems normal. But what if I told you that behind the hum of conversation and the clatter of pool balls, some of the darkest, most chilling encounters have taken place? Encounters that begin with a smile, a drink, or a stranger staring in sheer terror. Tonight, you'll hear 3 real stories of people who stepped into bars just like these, only to find themselves caught in a nightmare they could never have imagined. A tracking device slipped into a purse by a stranger with violent intent. A bartender who woke to find an intruder standing silently in his bedroom. And a young woman who realized too late that the eerie couple in the corner booth might not have been human at all. These are not urban legends. These are true events that happen to real people. And once you hear them, you'll never look at a bar the same way again. Welcome to The Price Paid. Subscribe now, and let's dive into the darkness. The night had started off like any other, with the quiet sort of loneliness that creeps in after a breakup. She had been with her boyfriend for 2.5 years, and even though the split had been mutual and relatively clean, it didn't make the days afterward any easier. Everywhere she went, everything she saw, carried some reminder of him. One of the hardest things to shake off was their shared love of playing pool. It had been their thing. He was a natural, capable of trick shots that drew attention in any bar, while she prided herself on being better than most of the casual players they encountered. They had spent countless evenings together at old dive bars, chalking cues and knocking balls across scratched green felt. It wasn't just a game. It was a ritual of comfort, a connection that went deeper than words. After the breakup, she missed that most of all. On a random Wednesday night, the silence of her apartment became unbearable. She didn't want to sit at home scrolling endlessly through social media feeds filled with people smiling and laughing, people whose lives didn't feel shattered. She craved distraction. Against her normal habits, she decided to go out alone, telling herself it wasn't about nostalgia, just about getting out. The bar she chose was one she and her ex had frequented, a small, dimly lit place, the kind that drew an older crowd, with scuffed floors and an air of stale beer that never quite left the room. The familiarity stung, but at the same time it brought a strange comfort. She told herself she could handle it. The bar was quiet that night, sparsely populated with older patrons nursing drinks at the counter. She ordered a couple of drinks and gravitated toward the pool tables, picking up a cue just to feel its weight again. She didn't want to play alone, didn't want to look pathetic standing there hitting balls into empty pockets. Just as she wondered whether she should leave, a man approached her. He was maybe mid-20s, the only one in the room anywhere close to her age. Leaning casually against the table, he asked if she was up for a game. His smile seemed friendly enough, and against her usual shy instincts, she agreed. They racked the balls, though she noticed he didn't do it properly and played. She quickly realized he wasn't particularly skilled, but not terrible either. He wasn't her ex, but for a while it felt good to play again. Round after round, she won each game, and between shots they chatted. He bought her drinks, laughed at her small jokes, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself enjoy the moment. But it didn't last. After the 4th game, his tone shifted. Out of nowhere, he asked if she wanted to go back to his place. It wasn't what she'd expected. Not so soon. She laughed it off lightly, saying he'd need a second date for that, hoping to keep things playful. But instead of taking the rejection in stride, his demeanor darkened instantly. His smile collapsed into a scowl. With a harsh grip, he grabbed her wrist and muttered angrily about how much money he had spent on her drinks. Shocked, she froze. Before she could even react, he snatched her purse. The moment felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it was only seconds before a couple of older men at the bar intervened. One of them barked at the stranger to let her go. The man sneered, tossed her purse back, and stormed out of the bar, leaving behind a heavy silence. Her hands shook as she clutched her purse, thanking the men who had stepped in. The incident left her rattled, but she tried to tell herself it was over. She called an Uber and decided to go home. The car ride was a blur of exhaustion and nerves, and at some point, she must have dozed off. When the driver woke her gently outside her house, she felt a flicker of relief. She was safe now, she thought. But as she walked to her door and absentmindedly pulled out her phone, everything changed. Her screen lit up with a chilling notification. AirTag found moving with you. She nearly dropped the phone. Heart pounding, she tore through her purse until her fingers brushed against something foreign. Pulling it out, she stared in horror at the small white tracker. He had planted it in her bag. Panic overtook her. And standing there in the middle of the street, she smashed it repeatedly under her shoe until it cracked apart. Breathing heavily, She scanned the empty street, but the emptiness only made her feel more exposed. Whoever had put the device there now knew the street she lived on. He knew she was home. She ran inside, locked the doors, and tried to calm herself. Sleep was impossible. Hours passed in restless silence until a sound pulled her to the window. A Cara beat-up Lincoln rolled slowly past her house. At first she told herself it was just a coincidence, but when it came back from the opposite direction, moving slower this time, her blood ran cold. By the third pass, she could no longer deny it. She ducked beneath the window, trembling. The driver's side window was rolled down halfway. A hand extended out, clutching what looked like a knife. Then the car stopped, idling directly across from her home. She stayed crouched, frozen in place, counting the pounding of her heartbeats, until finally, the car was gone. Only then did she dare to peek outside again, but the street was empty. Hours later, daylight brought no relief. She told her parents everything, and her father scolded her for not calling the police. But fear had locked her into silence the night before. The police said they couldn't do much without a plate number. The car hasn't been back since, but the terror hasn't left her.
Hello.
Even now, every creak of the house and every passing car outside carries with it the memory of that night, a reminder that sometimes the scariest thing about stepping into a bar isn't what happens inside, but what follows you home. Kevin had always considered himself a man who kept to his own world. Working as a bartender in a high-end rooftop lounge came with its perks money flowed in through generous tips. The skyline glittered around him each night, and he didn't have to deal with the same familiar faces over and over. That suited him just fine. He liked variety, anonymity, and the invisible shield that came with serving drinks to people who looked down on everyone but themselves. The last thing he ever expected was for one of those strangers to break through that shield, to step directly into his life with words that would follow him into the darkest hours of the night. It was a Friday evening, the kind of night where the energy in the lounge was electric. The room buzzed with expensive perfumes and clinking glasses. Couples leaned close to each other, friends toasted, and laughter rolled through the air. Kevin slipped into his rhythm easily, sliding drinks across polished wood, mixing cocktails without missing a beat, playing his private game of guessing each patron's story. He was halfway through refilling a wine glass when he noticed a man walk in who seemed completely out of place. While everyone else was dressed in tailored jackets and designer dresses, this man looked disheveled, his hair a greasy black mess, his leather jacket stained and worn. His eyes burned with an anger that Kevin felt the instant their gazes met. The man didn't take a seat. Instead, he stood at the bar, looming, glaring. Trying to mask his unease, Kevin asked if he could get him something. After a long pause, the man muttered that he wanted a double shot of Jaeger. Kevin poured it quickly, relieved at the simple request. Most patrons here wanted something flashy, something to show off, but this man slapped crumpled bills onto the counter, never breaking his stare. Kevin tried to move on, but then came the words that froze him. "I knew I'd find you here, Kevin." The glass nearly slipped from Kevin's hand. He demanded to know how the man knew his name, but the stranger only leaned closer, his voice low and full of venom. "I know what you did." Before Kevin could question him further, the man turned abruptly and walked away, disappearing toward the elevators. Kevin stood rooted behind the bar, rattled to his core. He didn't know the man. He couldn't think of a single person who might hold a grudge like that. For the rest of the shift, his hands worked on autopilot, but his mind replayed those words again and again. By the time his shift ended and he drove home, the unease hadn't left him. He double-checked his locks, turned off the lights, and tried to force himself to sleep. Hours later, he woke in the middle of the night. Something was wrong. He couldn't explain how he knew, but his instinct screamed. Slowly, his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and that was when he saw Ida's shadow in the corner of his bedroom. Tall, still, watching. Every hair on his body stood on end. Someone was in his room. Kevin's breath caught, but he forced himself to stay still, feigning sleep. He tried to tell himself it was a trick of his imagination, but no. He felt the presence. It was real. Summoning courage, he suddenly leapt from bed, yelling, ready to fight. The figure bolted, rushing to the door, footsteps pounding through the house. Kevin chased him, but by the time he reached the front door, it was wide open, the night outside empty. No sign of the intruder. Then Kevin remembered the sound he had heard when the figure moved something had dropped. His stomach twisted as he stepped back into his room and turned on the light. There, lying on the floor, was a kitchen knife. His knife. The intruder hadn't brought it. He had taken it from Kevin's own kitchen. Whoever that man was, he had come into Kevin's house intending to kill him. Shaking, Kevin dialed the police. Officers arrived, searched the house and yard, but found nothing. He described the man from the bar, but beyond that, there was little to go on. They retrieved security footage from the lounge, confirming his account of the stranger's appearance, but no identity came up. And then came the most disturbing detail, the locks. Kevin always locked every door and window before bed, and the police confirmed none had been forced or broken. No scratches, no tampering, no broken glass. Yet somehow, the man had entered, and just as silently, he had left. Days passed, then weeks. Kevin went back to work, but the man's words haunted him. "I know what you did." He replayed every choice he had made in his life, searching for an explanation. But no answer came. At night, sleep came fitfully, every creak of the house pulling him awake. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, he thought he felt eyes on him again. The knife he had found still sat locked away, in a drawer, a chilling reminder of how close he had come to a violent end. The stranger had not returned, but Kevin knew deep down the story wasn't over. Because, whoever that man was, he had found his way in once, and if he wanted to, he could do it again. Working the bar had always been chaotic, but she thrived on it. The place was a mix of restaurant and nightclub, a popular spot just outside Baltimore where the music stayed loud, and the crowd never seemed to die down. There were no waiters, bartenders did everything, from pouring drinks to sliding food across the counter. On most nights it was exhausting, but she liked the energy, the conversations, the constant flow of people. It kept her from thinking too much. She had grown used to the noise, the mess, the stumbling college kids who shouted for tequila until their voices cracked. But nothing in her years behind the bar could have prepared her for what happened that night. It started like any other busy weekend shift. The floor pulsed with bass, people danced near the DJ booth, drinks sloshed onto sticky tables, and she kept her head down, focusing on the never-ending orders. At some point, though, her eyes drifted toward the far corner of the room, where a booth sat half in shadow. There, an elderly couple had appeared. They looked strangely out of place among the rowdy crowd in a worn suit that seemed decades out of fashion, she in a faded dress with lace at the collar. At first, she didn't think much of it. Couples came in all the time, and maybe they were just looking for something different. But as the minutes ticked by, she realized something was off. They hadn't ordered a thing. No food, no drinks. They just sat there, motionless, staring at the wall beside them, as if it held their full attention. She tried to brush it off. Maybe they were waiting for someone. Maybe they thought a waiter would come. Still, the sight gnawed at her as she rushed through order after order. Finally, during a rare lull, she decided to check on them. Approaching with her usual polite smile, she cleared her throat and asked if they'd like anything. Neither turned toward her. The woman remained frozen, eyes locked on the wall. The man, however, shifted his head slowly, like a rusty hinge straining to move. When his face came into view, her stomach clenched. His skin was unnaturally pale, his cheeks hollow, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. He didn't say a word, just stared. After a long, heavy silence, he shook his head once, firmly. That was all. Unsettled, she muttered a quick acknowledgement and hurried back behind the bar, her pulse hammering in her ears. She tried to lose herself in work again, pouring and mixing, laughing at drunken jokes, pretending the encounter hadn't rattled her. But she couldn't stop herself from glancing back at the booth. When she finally did, her breath caught in her throat. Both of them were staring at her now. Not at the wall, not at each other. At her. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes seemed sharp, unblinking. She turned away quickly, forcing herself not to look again. She couldn't. She told herself she was imagining it, that maybe she was just tired. But deep down, she knew better. When the rush died down later that night, she allowed herself to glance toward the booth again. Empty. Relief washed over her. They were gone, and she told herself that was the end of it. Still, curiosity lingered. She decided to ask her coworker Karen about them as they cleaned up. Karen had been working there for years and noticed everything. But when she described the couple, Karen frowned and said she hadn't seen anyone like that. She even laughed, asking if she'd been hallucinating. To prove her point, Karen rattled off a list of 10 other customers who had come in that night, what they'd ordered, even what they'd worn. But no elderly couple. Not one. The bartender forced a laugh in return, but inside, dread coiled tighter in her gut. She knew what she had seen. Closing time came, and she stepped out into the cool night air. Keys clutched in her hand. The parking lot was mostly empty, shadows stretching long under the flickering lamps. As she approached her car, movement caught her eye. Across the street, under a single streetlight, Two figures stood side by side. Her heart plummeted. It was them, the man and the woman from the booth. They stood unnaturally still, their faces indistinct in the dim light. But she knew. She knew. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her voice caught in her throat. No sound came out. She fumbled her keys, nearly dropping them before scrambling into her car. Locking the doors, she started the engine with trembling hands and sped out of the lot, not daring to look back. The drive home felt endless. Her thoughts raced in circles, trying to rationalize, trying to explain. Had Karen somehow missed them? Was she losing her mind? Or was it something else, something she couldn't explain in the language of the ordinary world? The memory of their hollow eyes and their eerie stillness gnawed at her, as real as the steering wheel beneath her hands. She had seen them. She hadn't imagined it. And yet no one else had. Weeks have passed since that night, but the memory clings to her. Sometimes, when she closes her eyes, she sees them standing there again, unblinking, silent. Sometimes she wonders if they're still out there, waiting in another corner booth, staring at someone else, or worse, waiting for her to walk into another crowded room, only to find their eyes fixed on her once more. She never saw them again, but the absence of answers haunts her more than their presence ever did. Because what terrifies her most is not knowing if they were real people at all. Bars have always been places of escape. People walk into them to forget, to celebrate, to drown loneliness in music and noise, or to find fleeting connection in the clink of a glass. They are spaces designed to feel safe, a temporary shelter where strangers gather under dim light and the illusion that nothing outside those walls matters. But the stories we've already explored show a darker truth. Sometimes a bar is not just a place of laughter and release. Sometimes it is the gateway to something sinister, where danger slips in quietly and follows you home, where the line between the living and the dead becomes blurred, where a stranger's glance can change your life forever. Take the young woman from the first story. She only wanted to play pool, to reclaim a small piece of joy she had lost after a breakup. Instead, she found herself hunted. A simple game with a stranger turned into a fight for control when he revealed his darker side. The violation of her trust didn't stop inside the bar. It followed her into the street, into her home, into her very sense of security. That AirTag hidden in her purse was more than a piece of plastic and circuitry. It was a tether. A silent stalker whispering that no place was safe, not even her own bedroom. And when she saw that car circling, knife glinting from the driver's hand, she realized the bar had been the starting point of something much worse. Her story reminds us that sometimes evil isn't supernatural. Sometimes it's just human, raw, and terrifyingly persistent. Then there's Kevin, the bartender, who thought he was untouchable behind his polished counter in a luxury rooftop lounge. His encounter began with a stranger's stare, a drink order, and words that cut deeper than any blade. I know what you did. It didn't matter that Kevin didn't recognize him, didn't understand. The stranger's intrusion shattered the boundary between customer and bartender, between professional distance and personal vulnerability. And it didn't end there. Kevin carried the fear home, only to wake in the middle of the night with a shadow standing in the corner of his room. That knife left behind on his floor was not just a weapon, it was proof of intent. Proof that someone had crossed into his world with plans too horrifying to fully process. The locks on his doors meant nothing. The police could not explain it, and Kevin was left with the unshakable truth that danger had not only found him, but had walked freely into his home. His story lingers as a reminder that terror does not respect walls, money, or status. It finds cracks and seeps through them. And then there's the bartender in Baltimore who saw something she should not have been able to see. Her bar was not a place of stalkers or angry men. It was a place where something otherworldly stepped in. That elderly couple, silent and immovable, staring at walls and then at her, were out of time, out of place. They broke the rhythm of the bar in a way that unsettled her more deeply than spilled drinks or slurred words ever could. When her coworker swore no such couple had been there, when memory clashed against testimony, the dread only deepened. And seeing them again outside, waiting under a streetlight, was a confirmation she didn't want. They were not customers, they were something else. Whether ghosts, illusions, or something darker, their presence reminded her that not all dangers can be explained away. Some horrors are meant to remain unresolved, gnawing at the edges of your sanity. What ties these stories together is not just the setting of bars, but the betrayal of what bars are supposed to be. A place of comfort turned into a place of terror. A familiar corner booth became a stage for the unexplainable. A busy lounge became a hunting ground, and a casual game of pool turned into the beginning of a stalking nightmare. Each story carries its own lesson, but together they form something more unsettling, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with a scream or a bang. It whispers through casual conversation, hides in a smile, slips into your pocket, or waits silently in the corner. You won't notice it until it's too late. Bars are liminal, space transient, temporary, never truly belonging to anyone who walks through them. That makes them fertile ground for danger. Strangers pass in and out. Names are forgotten, faces blur together. You think you are safe because you are surrounded by people, because the music is loud, because the lights flicker. But safety in numbers is an illusion. In the wrong moment, when the crowd thins or your guard drops, you may find yourself utterly alone, even in a room full of people. The woman with the AirTag thought she was in public, protected by others, until she realized her predator had slipped closer than she ever imagined. Kevin thought his bar was a barrier until his name was spoken by someone who had no right to know it. And the bartender in Baltimore thought her coworker would confirm what she saw, only to be told she was alone in that experience. Each story dismantles the idea that bars are safe havens. Instead, they become stages where fear plays out, unpredictable and raw. And perhaps that is what makes these stories so disturbing. They don't resolve neatly. The woman never learned if the man with the Lincoln returned. Kevin never discovered how his intruder broke inside. The bartender never found out what those figures really were. The endings remain open, jagged, unfinished. And maybe that's the point. Horror doesn't always end with answers. Sometimes it ends with questions that keep you awake at night, wondering if the next stranger you meet will be the one who follows you home, the one who already knows your name, or the one who isn't human at all. So the next time you step into a bar, remember these stories. Look carefully at the people who surround you. Listen to your instincts, and never assume that the night will end the way you think it will. Because sometimes the price of a drink is far greater than the cash in your wallet. Sometimes the price paid is your peace, your safety, even your sanity. Bars are supposed to be places where people unwind, where the noise of laughter and music drowns out the heaviness of the world. But the three stories we've just explored remind us that even in the most ordinary of settings, horror can slip through unnoticed. Each of these tales reveals a different face of fear, and together they form a chilling reminder that danger does not always wait in dark alleys or abandoned houses. Sometimes it waits in the very places we feel most comfortable. The young woman who only wanted to play pool discovered how quickly a stranger's charm could curdle into violence. What began as harmless fun turned into an attempted assault, and later into stalking that followed her home. The AirTag in her purse was more than a device. It was a symbol of how modern technology can be twisted into a weapon of fear. Her story warns us that vigilance is not optional, that predators can hide in plain sight, waiting for the smallest opportunity. Kevin, the bartender, learned that no amount of status or security can keep terror away. His encounter with the angry stranger shattered the illusion of control. When he woke in the middle of the night to find someone standing in his bedroom, he realized the locks he trusted meant nothing. The knife on his floor was proof that sometimes evil does not knock, it enters silently, with deadly intent. His story shows us how fragile our sense of safety really is, and how little separates us from catastrophe. The bartender in Baltimore faced something stranger still, something that defied explanation. The couple who appeared, stared, and vanished without acknowledgement, left behind no evidence, no confirmation, just a hollow terror that could not be rationalized. Her coworkers dismissed her experience, but the figures she saw outside the bar ensured she would never forget. This story reveals that some horrors cannot be explained or solved. They exist in the cracks of reality, where logic cannot reach. Together, these stories remind us that danger is unpredictable. It can be human or inhuman, violent or silent, physical or psychological. It can strike in a crowded bar as easily as in an empty street. And most terrifying of all, it often leaves no resolution, no sense of closure, only lingering questions, and the constant awareness that it could happen again. So what can we take from this? First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Second, protect yourself, keep your phone close. Stay aware of your surroundings, and never ignore the signs of danger, no matter how small they seem. And finally, remember that fear is not weakness. Fear is the body's way of telling us to survive. Listen to it. These were not urban legends. These were real people in real bars, living real nightmares. And the truth is, it can happen to any of us. If you ever find yourself in a situation like theirs, choose safety first, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it may feel. Because when it comes to survival, hesitation can be deadly. This is the chilling reality of what happens when a simple night out turns into a story you will never escape. And if you want to hear more true tales of terror, subscribe now to The Price Paid, because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that actually happen.